Hello. Um, I'm always very stressed when I speak in public, and I'm always saying this because I feel that everybody should know that all the speakers are really stressed. So if you feel like you're always stressed about talking in public, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. Like, as you see, I do it anyway. This year, I'm going to speak about one of my favorite topics, which is my organization. I absolutely love talking about organizations and how you run organizations and about management because I really, really think it matters. And sometimes it matters even more than winning some campaigns or doing some projects. In our team, we sometimes have those discussions on what is our biggest success. And although I'm actually really proud of all the stuff that we did, because we started just 6 years ago as a group of friends who mostly met at punk shows or at squats, we were able to build an organization that now hires around 35 people in 6 countries. And we were able to publish a lot of investigations, work with local communities that successfully block the construction of new factory farms. We organized numerous conferences, like the first CARE conference was also organized in Poland. We got a couple of awards, like award for the best campaign in Europe given by Eurogroup for Animals, or we quite successfully worked with the food business to introduce new vegan options, both in restaurants and as like products on shelf markets. We did VR investigations. We, together with Albert Schweitzer Foundation, that also works in Poland, we got over 100 companies to introduce cage-free policies in our country. Because of this, we got an award for, like Marta, our coordinator of corporate outreach campaigns, got an award as the person who changes the business. And we were able to also put the animal protection and animal rights message to the front pages of big newspapers. But still, every time I think about what is the single biggest success that we've had, it's actually the organization itself. And the reason for this is that I feel that we were able to achieve all of those things, not because we have like the smartest leadership or the best plan or the biggest amount of resources, but basically because very early on, when we founded Open Cages, Otwarte Klatki, we decided that our structure will be based on actually sharing the leadership and sharing the ownership of the organization with as many people as possible that are interested in changing the lives of animals for the better. And how it works in practice. I feel that every time I speak about it with other groups or organizations, they think it's quite crazy. So what we mostly do is our leadership does not necessarily make a lot of decisions. Most of our volunteers and employees as well are able to choose their own priorities, and they write their own plans for the next months. And we are trying to allow people to make decisions about the projects they are involved in. And we are moving the decision-making process as low in the hierarchy, even though our hierarchy is still not really big, as low as possible. So basically, if you work on a campaign, if you work on a project or on an event, in most cases you'll actually make like 99% of the decisions involved in what you do. And today, because I got the big room, I would try to kind of defend this way of thinking and maybe even persuade you that what we are doing here really, really makes sense. So the first reason why I think leaders in organizations should actually not have a lot of power is the self-enhancement bias that everybody has. We tend to think about ourselves as more rational, smarter, and better than other people. You probably have heard it that like most of the drivers think that they drive better than the average. The thing is that we all have it, and the leaders have the problem to even higher degree than other people. Why does it happen? Because every time organization succeeds, every time the campaign succeeds, who gets the most credit? It's usually the leaders. So the thing is that with every year you're on your position, you're actually starting thinking about yourself and your decisions as getting even better and better. And maybe they are, but there's actually a lot of data that says that what really grows is just overconfidence and not always the skills. And having very overconfident people at the top of the organization is not really a smart thing to have. Another problem is that power actually affects people. It's not only the overconfidence. There is a lot of research on leaders, both in industry or in politics, that shows that it kind of doesn't even matter with what mindset you start working. Power really gets to your head. And the longer you are in the position of power, the more tendencies you have of actually very destructive behaviors. And overconfidence is just one of them, because there are also others. Your risk-taking increases. You become insensitive to other people. You start thinking about other people as only means to your end. And I really feel that even a lot of like really bad situations we've seen in animal rights movement in the last months did not come from the fact that some of the leaders of big organizations did not know what is right or wrong. It's just that they felt that they have so much power in their organizations that make them absolutely like above all the rules. So all in all, I really believe that we should keep the power structure kind of in check in the movement. There's even a very funny experiment that involved biscuits. And I think it's a good illustration on how power works and how quickly it works, how quickly it starts influencing people. So basically the experimenters built a couple of groups of people that don't really know each other before. And they chose some people as leaders in those groups. And they were performing some tasks, but from the very early moment we knew who the leader is in each group. And then the real test was the biscuits. So after the task has finished, they put cookies on the table. And what they saw is that everybody took one, but most of the leaders not only rather decided to take two of them, but they were also more likely to actually eat with their mouths open. So if having power can change your behavior, statistically at least, in a matter of like half an hour or an hour during the experiment, imagine what it does to your brain if you're in power for like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or 20. Another reason I believe we should not have structures that give a lot of power to individual people is that sometimes we have this problem that we actually like some decisions better, not because they are better, but only because we had some role in making them. And there's another good experiment about it. So experimenters took MBA graduates from a couple from one university, and they were all supposed to choose the best Swatch advertisement. And there were 3 scenarios. In the first scenario, the CEO, let's say, was told that there is not enough time, so you only see the final version of the advertisement. In the second scenario, the CEO got a feedback form, filled the feedback form, but then was told that because of some miscommunication, the employee did not get the feedback. So even though the feedback was given, the CEO only, again, saw the final version of the advertisement without the person who's doing the advertisement receiving this feedback. And then there was the third scenario, where the person the CEO, saw like the first version of the project, gave the feedback, was told that the feedback was received by the employee, and then saw the final version. The thing is, everybody saw the same final advertisement. In two scenarios, the CEOs did not have a feeling that what they said influenced the final version. Only the third person was told that they influenced the final version. And what the researchers found out? They found out that even though the feedback had zero influence on the work of the employee, the leaders that were told that they did influence the outcome liked the outcome twice as much. And that's also like, if we always assume that leaders are always right and they always have the best ideas, well, it's probably good. But we are all humans, and we all have our own biases. So I think there are sometimes better ways to choose the right, better version of the leaflet or the right track for the campaign. But then comes another reason why I think we should involve more people in managing our organizations. Basically, if people who are supposed to run the campaigns are really involved in what they do, the campaigns will finally look better. So I really feel that if you look at animal rights organizations, or even if you look at a lot of companies, their strategy is kind of very, very similar. Like, for example, we want to push for better animal welfare, so that animal products will become more expensive or would actually be moved out from the market. We want more vegan options so that it's easily available. Or we want better legislation. So we do not differ that much in terms of what the strategy is. Usually the difference between very good and very bad projects is in the execution. And if you want the campaigns and projects to be executed really well, you really want all the people involved to love the idea and to work as hard as possible to make it happen. So then coming back to this scenario with different ads. If we know that if a person thinks or actually is involved in making the final decision, if we know that it makes this person like the decision twice as much, doesn't it actually make sense to involve activists in making this decision? Because those are the people that will finally work on the project. So if they like it twice as much, I think it's actually more meaningful than if the leader likes it twice as much. At the same time, I feel that if we want to get more involvement from volunteers or employees, we also have to change the way we look at failures and mistakes that people are making. And for me, the good approach to mistakes is to really think in long-term perspective. Because of course, if we're extremely scared of making any mistakes, someone saying something stupid in the media, someone making a mistake in press release, or not having the perfect leaflet or something like this, then, well, if we are very, very stressed about it, if we are very much afraid that something will go wrong, it kind of makes sense to only always make your smartest and best people to make all the decisions. But then, if you think that, I'm always saying that if I knew that this next interview in the media will really win the animal liberation, I would really choose like the best interviewer I can. But I also understand that we are facing huge industries, and this struggle will continue for many, many years. So for me, it actually makes sense to push as many people from my organization as possible to speak to the media, to write press releases, to organize events, because that's the only way they can actually learn it. And by pushing a lot of people to do all the stuff that is really uncomfortable for them sometimes, and giving them this opportunity to even fail from time to time, I feel that we are preparing the organization for the future. We are preparing organization to grow. I think you can also think that you can just train people like for a long time before you allow them to do some things in the public. But I think that there is always a limit to how much you can achieve with training. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't prepare or that we shouldn't teach or like educate employees or activists. I'm just saying that there is a huge difference in the amount of stress when you're doing it as a part of the training or when you're really doing it live. And maybe the best comparison for me is like in martial arts, the stress level on a sparring session and on like real competition is totally different. And it can sometimes destroy like even professional martial artists. So in the end, there will be no other way to really learn the stuff than just doing it. And speaking about like not being afraid to fail or sometimes even produce mediocre results, I think we should also remember that when you think about all the geniuses, either in science or in art, the funny thing that was noticed by people who were researching their lives was that the amount of works that were bad and the amount of works that were good were actually very similar between the geniuses and other like average contemporary artists or scientists of their era. The main difference why we remember some names and do not remember other names is just the amount of works they published or the amount of paintings they made. They also noticed that if you look at the lifetime of an artist or a scientist, usually the period where they created the best stuff is also the period that they created the worst stuff. So it was just the most creative period. And again, I feel that it's impossible to win big if you're really, really afraid to also fail big. Another way we are using to involve people and to build trust in the organization, because I believe trust is also a big part of the whole thing, is quite radical transparency. One example of this is that we pay equally and all our salaries are transparent. We even publish it on our website. I really believe in treating all the people I work with, be that employees or like volunteers, activists, as really good and I'm trying to treat all the people I work with as actually great activists. And there is a lot of research that shows that if we start paying some people more, or if we try to acknowledge some people more and show that they are better than other people, we might actually motivate them, but we destroy the motivation of the rest of the team. And in the end, it actually harms us even more than it gave us in the beginning. And I also believe that transparency in the organization generally builds trust. All the plans we're making for what we're going to do in next months, our employees see what my plan is, and they have like the same right to give feedback on it as I can make on their plans. In our organization, actually, all volunteers can see what I'm doing every day. So I'm held accountable not only as a leader, not only in front of employees, but actually in front of all the volunteers of the organization. And in this way, we are also trying to send this message that we are just equal in it. Some people are paid for their work, and because of this, they can work for animals for 8 hours per day. Others do it in their free time, but in the end, we all care. Another way to, and this is more for actual leaders, directors, or managers in organizations. Another way you can build engagement is to be thankful for all the criticism you get. Because you have to remember that it's very hard for people to criticize anyone that's higher up, especially if you hire those people, like especially if you can make the decision to fire them if you don't like them. So we should always appreciate those rare people who are brave enough to actually tell you, I didn't like what you did. Because they are your true friends, and people who are brave enough to tell you what they didn't like about what you did and that criticize you and point out your mistakes are the only people that can actually make you better and can make your organization better. I have to admit, it's not always easy. So if you're getting some criticism, it's it always hurts in the beginning. It's just this moment to breath, and then just write or call the person and tell them that you actually thank them for that. And there is probably one of the most important issues in getting as much involvement of individual activists in the decision-making process and all that's being done in the organization is actually the psychological well-being of activists. This is a quote from a book that I really recommend. It's called Hard Facts, Dangerous Half-Truths, and Total Nonsense. And it goes like this. A huge behavioral science literature, studies of everyone from nursing home patients to assembly line workers to surgical nurses to software developers, shows that having both perceived and actual control over what happens in our lives is essential to the mental and physical health of all human beings, and it causes us to try harder too. So I think it's very important to talk about work-life balance, about really taking holidays, avoiding too much overtime and things like this. But we should also remember that it's actually having agency in our workplace that makes our employees or activists happier. And then comes another part to what I feel is important in getting bigger engagement, and it's just education. Of course, I don't think that any person that comes through the door, I would say the office, but we don't have an office, can make like strategic decision for the future of the organization. That wouldn't make sense. So a big part of how we work is education. Like, and it starts, in our example, it starts with the moment people become volunteers. Basically, you cannot join the group before going through the first training, and then there will be multiple others later on. We actually make sure to give the same learning opportunities to all the volunteers that we give to all the employees. And we find it very valuable because a lot of our volunteers are actually just people that we would never afford to hire because they have really good jobs and they are like PR specialists, programmers, I know, vets, lawyers. So I think they really appreciate that we take their opinions into account. And when I say that education is important in the work of the organization, I also mean that we try to create a culture of reading and growing your skills that focuses not only on skills that you need for the job, like for example, creating better websites or writing better press releases, but we try to push everybody involved in the organization to actually read a lot about politics, I know, effective altruism, the theory of social change, like the strategy for campaigns. There is also, I feel that we should also remember that even leaders should probably read more. And there is also a good reasons for that. It always surprises me when I talk with CEOs or presidents that tell me that they don't have time to read. You know, I don't know if you know that Bill Gates actually takes a couple of times per year, I think. He takes a retreat for a week to only focus on reading. So I feel that if he finds time to do this, anybody probably should. And there is a couple of good reasons why we should read more or listen to more podcasts or more articles or watch more lectures. One of it is that you can actually just learn more. But I also read an interesting article that introduced an idea of something that they called an anti-library. So anti-library is all the books that you have never read but are already on your shelf. If you're a big reader, you probably understand the idea. I'm always buying books much faster than I can ever read them. So the guy who wrote this article claims that having this anti-library is actually very important because it's a powerful reminder of your limitations, the vast quantity of things you don't know, half know, or will one day realize you're wrong about. By living with that reminder daily, you can nudge yourself toward the kind of intellectual humility that improves decision-making and drives learning. So I encourage everybody to read more, maybe even take retreats to read, not only like regular activists, so to say, but also leadership. It could either give you more knowledge or at least make you more humble, and I think it's also important. It's also something that I had to learn. But for me, the most important reason why we should focus a lot in education in the organization is the fact that it actually builds the capacity of the movement. And the way I try to look at people that I work with, like activists in my organizations, be that employees or volunteers, is that we want everybody, at least everybody who's willing to do it, to become a future leader. I'm trying to treat everybody and push them to read stuff that would make them become a leader in the future. And that's why we put so much focus on this kind of general knowledge stuff in the organization. And I think this is incredibly important because, again, we are fighting huge industries. We are not winning yet, like even though there has been like a lot of successes in the movement. So I strongly believe that one thing that we also need is actually much, much bigger movement. And maybe also a movement that just knows more. So by having this focus on creating future leaders, I think it's one way to actually grow the movement, because at some point it just doesn't doesn't make sense to have this growing bubble with like few leaders at the top and organizations that are only growing and growing in size. And I think at this moment, when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking about it, and I really think that at this moment, when I look at employees I work with the most in Poland, like I mostly work with the Polish team, I could really say that not only them, but a big amount of volunteers we have in the organization. I would be sure that if they decided to actually leave us and start their own organizations, I would feel that they will succeed in it. And as much I would hate to lose them, at the same time, if they succeeded in their own projects, I would feel that we did our work pretty well. So when you feel that leaders don't matter that much and shouldn't matter that much, and more decisions should be done by volunteers, employees, and people who are just involved in your organization, you can ask, what is the role of the leaders? And in my opinion, it's actually quite simple, although probably not as rewarding as being this one person that makes all decisions and then likes them a lot because they are mine. It's just having this eagle eye on the organization, eagle eye view of the organization, being able to show the direction. Also, but probably the biggest and most important thing is to actually build a strong structure that allows a lot of other people to make decisions and to create structures and cultures that bring the best of people. Sometimes the best thing that leaders in organizations should do is to just shut up and allow others to do their work. And I always think, like, when I was working on building the structure for the organization, I was getting inspired by the startup culture a lot. And for me, it's always quite striking that a lot of startups actually give their employees and people involved in them a lot of freedom. There are some companies that are very well known for that, like Valve, who say that you don't hire the most creative people in the industry just to later tell them what to do. So I think this is something that I would like to see more in organizations as well. And here I feel that we can learn a lot from the startup culture. Like, if they are not afraid to give all the power to their employees, I don't feel that we should be so much afraid of it. And there is also a good reason for that. If you work in a company, you mostly get motivation because someone pays you. And organizations, like not only animal rights organizations, but generally NGOs, are in this very good position that basically everybody who is involved in them actually really cares about the success. And this is something that no money can buy. Thank you.
So we have time now to do a Q&A. If anyone has questions, I'll come to you with the microphone.
Hello, my name is Rinka. I'm from Croatia, Association Pobjede, and I would very much like to know how is your organization structured?
Okay. We have some local groups, volunteer local groups. We also have employees. At this moment in Poland, it's easier for me to speak about Poland because it might sometimes differ from the country to country because, for example, in Belarus we only hire one person, so the structure is different there, but simpler. So we have, at this moment, we have 20 employees in Poland. We have 6 directors who are mostly people who were also founders of the organization. I don't know how detailed should that be. Like, do you want to actually tell me how we make decisions? Because maybe that matters more.
Yes, how do you function?
So there are some people oversee some employees. For example, Marta, who is the corporate outreach director, she works with other people in the corporate outreach sector. But for example, when the corporate outreach team makes plans for the next 3 months, they do it together. And everybody suggests what makes sense, and then they discuss it in a team, like what will be the priorities of the team. And some teams are even more independent because there is no director that's like directly involved with this. For example, Marta, again, like sitting just in front of you, because she's involved in corporate outreach, she also oversees our food business team. That's just 2 people. So they mostly actually make their own decisions. And I feel that it kind of sounds crazy, and I have to admit it, but I feel that it also works for us. Like, usually in animal rights organizations, when you hire people, you're getting a lot more resumes than many companies. Like, that's at least our experience. So we are really able to find extremely motivated people who really want to succeed in their work. For me, if they are given tools, like a couple of books to read, a couple of articles to read, and they are also like invited to the table when we speak about strategy for this campaign, my feeling is that in the end, they are able to make much better decisions than I would be able to make in the end. And also the reason for it is that they can focus on their job. Like at this moment, we do investigations, we do media work, we do lobbying, and we do corporate outreach campaigns and some like meat reduction campaigns. My feeling is that if I were to be responsible for strategies for like every single part of the job, I think I would actually do a very mediocre job in it, because you cannot be equally good in all of them. So I think that's also a good reason to push the decision-making process to as low as possible. Another reason for me is that I'm sometimes getting questions either from volunteers or from employees that are basically, there is a situation like this, should I do this or not? And then I feel, I usually say I refuse to answer this question, because for me the whole context is just 2 sentences. So if I were to say yes or no, that's extremely irresponsible. I would rather have the person who exchange a couple of emails with the company and can kind of also have the feeling, for example, if it's like going well or not, to make the final decision, not me. I actually think it's safer, just because sometimes I wouldn't even have time to get enough context to make informed decision. And again, if I wanted to have enough context with every single decision we make, I would just go crazy.
Yes, thank you for giving that talk, and thank you for putting your focus of a keynote speech on that issue. I find that issue very important. I know that there are some quite hierarchical groups amongst the animal rights movement. I would love to hear some arguments for why it is good to have hierarchical groups. Maybe there is somebody here who would be willing to provide those arguments. But I have a specific question for you, maybe two questions. The one is, I didn't fully get, how do you become director? Is there an election procedure, or are you just employed as director, and by whom are you employed? I mean, how is that decision going? And do you have, say, plenary meetings where you all decide who is being employed? Or, and the second question is, there's one worry of such low hierarchy organizations, that is, they can be overtaken by the enemy. There could be an infiltration, and if there is no hierarchical structure, it can be overtaken. So how do you defend yourself against that?
Okay, so this is also something that we took into account very early on. So there is, again, I feel that there is a limit to how much power people can have. It's difficult to answer those questions because they are kind of interconnected. So I will try to answer them piece by piece. So I was elected as a president, but also it was. We are working as an association. So associations in Poland, they elect the board. We decided to put this into our bylaws, that there is a limited number of people who can vote here. So for us, this is also a way to at least keep the board more secure. Like I don't know how, if it will be easy for me to explain it. It's just that most people who are our members don't have the right to vote for the president. And for us, it was mostly the security measure, so that it's not possible to be taken over so easily. And I know that such situations actually already have happened in the movement, so we wanted to make sure it doesn't happen for us. But it's for us, it's also more of a legal thing. So a lot of volunteers in the organization, even if they are not allowed to vote on who will be the next president or vice president, they still can have a decision-making power in the projects they are involved in. So we were actually very inspired by the last book here, Swarmwise. And I think Erik Falkfinger makes interesting case there on kind of against like democracy in the organizations, but rather suggesting what he calls meritocracy, where it's not that everybody decides about everything, because I think it really doesn't make sense. Just like I, as a leader, it's impossible for me to know everything about everything. Then people who are not involved in projects also usually don't have a say in them, let's say. Because sometimes you just need enough knowledge to, like, I don't want to have an opinion on our IT, because I know nothing about it. And I know that there is like a lot of science even behind colors in websites. So I just don't even want anyone to take my opinion into account when we build websites. And the fact that I'm the CEO doesn't mean anything here. But it's rather people who work on our IT team that will make a lot of decisions. So it kind of more like this is how it works, at least for us.
How many people are those who are allowed to vote? Is this an artificial number you just line?
It's kind of artificial for Poland, because in Poland it's 15. This was the minimum to start an association in Poland, but we were quite specific about not making it bigger. So on one hand, yes, it does mean that the leadership is only chosen by 15 people. But I also feel that the way we later work is that the leadership in the end also does not have that much power about the organization. So I feel it kind of it makes it equal. The reason for us to not also have a big number of people who are voting members is that, for example, in our first court case, every single person who was like a voting member, was taken to court as well. So because we are also like investigation and campaigning organization, for us it's also a security measure that this group of people who actually like have a say in who's the leader and have access to all the documents also cannot be that big, just for the security for security reasons.
And do they sometimes change? Do people drop out? And
Yes,
then new
people sometimes
come in?
drop out, and then we just invite other people to join in. But again, I also feel I don't see a good reason to make organizations like super democratic in the sense that, you know, like a person that has just been here for a week has the same say as someone who's been for 5 years. I think it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. So I would never want an organization that works this way. I just feel that we generally should move the like power structure lower in the hierarchy. But inviting anyone to participate in big decisions, I feel is just irresponsible.
Just a brief word with us, it's you have to be 1 year activist, then you are eligible to vote, but
Okay.
without upper bound.
First, thank you for the talk. I'm sure there are a lot of leaders and upcoming leaders in this room, and what advice would you have for them when it comes to, I know from my experience, a lot of new leaders struggle with, I mean, they agree with what you say, yet they struggle with relinquishing power because they're afraid of not achieving the goals that they've been tasked with. So I guess the question is, what advice would you have for leaders on how to deal with, let's say, underperforming employees? Team members.
Okay, so underperforming team members is, I think it is a big issue. The problem is, what's the reason for it? And I can see a lot of reasons here. The way I approach it is that if I really did not trust the person, or if I would really see that this person does not work hard, I would want them to leave the organization. In the sense that we actually sometimes ask even volunteers to leave the organization if we feel that they can be either harmful to the organization or sometimes even to the groups, because sometimes you will just have conflicts in the groups, and some people are just toxic, as you say, or something like this. And then if it's not like a problem of a person that is just like, you know, a bad employee or a bad activist, then sometimes I feel that problem with performance is the problem of structure. And I could see this for myself because I was involved in a lot of organizations before I started my own. And I was volunteering to, I was volunteering with one group, and I already had some experience in animal rights, but then I ended up surrounded by people where I felt that even when I'm given quite responsible thing to do, I have to check. It was like creation of a vegan, some vegan starter kit, like, you know, the brochure, and I had to read aloud every like page on like meetings, and then every sentence was discussed, so everything was like totally checked by the group and so on. And I felt that, you know, I'm doing a lot of work, but I cannot like make even very simple decisions. And then I noticed how my own motivation is really dropping. So then, for me, that was very interesting experience, because I always considered myself very active person. Like before animal rights, I was also involved with feminist movement and with some squatters movement. So that was very new to me, to like see myself as this person that does not want to go to meetings, is not really motivated to do the things, and would rather just do something else than be an activist. So I feel that sometimes we should also ask ourselves if we are not doing something wrong as leaders that makes those people mediocre. And I also feel that if we think that we aren't, we should also probably ask those people for feedback, because it's easy to feel from our position that, you know, everything's going really well, but sometimes the opinion of people we work with might be very, very different.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. It was brilliant. So I'm running an organisation called Animal Justice Project, and this is really interesting for me because I set up AJP 3 years ago, and we've finally been able to employ somebody, a first person, and I've employed a fundraiser. But I guess my question to you is, how do you choose which people to employ in the organisation? Because hopefully if the fundraiser brings in more money, we'll be able to employ properly a second person. You know, I'm sort of thinking it'd be great to have somebody managing social media or managing press, but I just wondered what your experience is if you sort of draw your memory back when you actually first could afford to employ people. Like, how do you choose who to employ?
But in the sense that how do I choose the person to employ, or how do I choose the position that needs to be filled?
Yeah, the position. Thanks.
So the first person we hired was like this person that does it all. And like honestly, at that moment, there wasn't much thinking behind it because we were so poor that it was basically the only person that would agree to get paid so little. Because really the first person that we hired is like Pavel, our vice president. Some of you might know him. And at this moment he was working in some falafel place. So he was just the only person that could decide to make even less than he makes in the falafel place. And his position was basically called Pavel, like. And I think that's kind of true about all the organizations that decide to hire the first employee. That the first person will just have to deal with all the earthquakes and all the problems and things like this. Like, I don't know if because of this it would be even easy for me to answer these questions, because it's also very specific to, but for me it's also important to push all the people I work with. And again, like I try to look at people in open cages as just activists. So for me, it doesn't really matter if someone is a volunteer or an employee, because a lot of people, like I was a volunteer for 5 years before I started working. Like I started working full time like a year and like 3 months ago or something like this. So that's why we actually try to push people to have very general knowledge about things, because honestly we have no idea what we are going to do as an organization in 2 years. Like we started as an investigation organization, so the first thing we were like basically in the beginning everybody was involved in the investigations, and now the biggest successes we have are in corporate outreach. So it kind of meant that some people that were doing investigations in the beginning just, you know, put on the suits and started meeting with companies. And I think that's actually really, really cool about activists, that we are flexible and we can like either you know, jump through fences, or later on like learn to edit videos and learn to send press releases and things like this. So I think I would hire someone for like very general position and find the person who's just like a true activist at heart, that will be willing to both put on high heels, like if it's a woman, or like if it's a man and wears high heels, that's even better because that shows like commitment. And who would be able to basically do whatever, because in the beginning you will need everything.
Thank you.
I was going to ask exactly the same question, but I will exactly, but I will insist on this. Like, so you have the funds. You're new. You have the funds. So you're not taking just a general thing. So whom will you choose? What position will you choose to fund, if you can afford it? Will it be a specialist? Will it be an IT specialist? Will it be a fundraiser?
I wouldn't hire a specialist. I would really hire a very generally skilled and extremely devoted person. Because especially IT, like you can just pay someone to make a website. You don't need, I don't think you really need an IT specialist, unless this IT specialist is just like cool volunteer, that, like cool activist that can also do like a lot of other stuff. I think that's basically what you need when you're starting. I think it is a bit complicated, because really when you're starting, it's hard to say you need a fundraiser or you need a media person. We benefited a lot from hiring a fundraiser. We also benefited a lot from hiring a great media person and from hiring full-time investigator. The problem is that in the beginning, you need all of that, like if you do investigations at least. So we started actually writing job descriptions, I think with the 3rd or 4th employee.
And if I can ask a different question, because you've addressed the notion of democracy in the organization, did you ever have to address do you have to address the question, democracy with food, like raising the cost of animal products, so that makes it not affordable for a certain category of people? Did you ever have to answer this?
Well, one way to answer this, that maybe meat shouldn't be affordable. No, I feel that at least the way we try to work is that we kind of do two things at once. So we have a section that works on animal welfare issues and a section that works on food issues. And I feel that on one hand, of course, if we push for better animal welfare, animal products are going to cost more, and they should cost more. Because at this moment, not only we pay for them twice, because we pay for them in taxes and subsidies, but we also pay sometimes it's the local communities that pay for them, or the animals themselves. So it definitely should cost more. But at the same time, I think it makes sense to pressure for more vegan options or like plant-based options, because if the plant-based options become more popular, then the economy of scale starts working and they can just become more affordable. And it's actually a win-win, because then it's the healthy food that becomes more affordable than non-healthy food, which is like a lot of animal products that, you know, their influence on our health is not always good. So. But again, I don't think that every organization should do both. We should just have diverse movement with different organizations, sometimes just pressuring for different things. And it's okay to just focus on pressuring for better welfare, just trusting other activists to press for more vegan options in the markets, so that the vegan options will become more accessible, because companies will just produce them in tons and not in small batches.